If your doctor prescribed you heroin for a cough, you'd probably switch doctors. 100 years ago, that was just good medicine. So was draining half your blood to fix a sore throat. So was drinking radioactive water to feel young again. Every one of these was real. Doctors prescribed them. Pharmacies sold them, and people paid good money. Sure, they were doing the right thing. Here are the cures that turned out to be catastrophes. Bloodletting. Bloodletting is the oldest medical mistake there is. For 2,000 years, doctors were sure that illness came from an imbalance of 4 fluids in the body. The fix was simple. Open a vein and let some blood out. Barbers did it. Physicians did it. It was prescribed for fevers, headaches, tiredness, sadness, almost anything. And the same patient might be bled over and over during a single illness. The problem is obvious once you say it out loud. Draining blood from a sick person doesn't remove the illness. It removes the thing the body needs to fight it. George Washington caught a bad throat infection in 1799. Over one day, his doctors drained close to half the blood in his body. He died that night, and most historians think the treatment is what killed him. There's a strange twist here, though. The leeches doctors once used never fully went away. Surgeons still use them today in careful cases to keep blood moving through reattached tissue. Mercury. Mercury was the standard treatment for syphilis for about 400 years. Doctors rubbed it into the skin. They injected it. They even sealed patients in boxes to breathe the vapor. The idea was that one poison could push out another. And it seemed to work because the sores would fade, so patients kept coming back for more. But mercury is a slow poison. It loosened teeth. It wrecked kidneys. It set hands trembling and slowly damaged the mind. The trouble is that those symptoms looked almost exactly like advanced syphilis. Doctors often couldn't tell which one was actually killing the patient. There was a saying back then, a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. It wasn't much of an exaggeration. Corpse medicine. Corpse medicine was exactly what it sounds like, and for centuries it was normal European pharmacy. Apothecaries sold powdered human skull. They sold ground-up Egyptian mummy. They even sold human fat, prescribed for epilepsy, bruises, and bleeding. Demand for mummy got so high that traders started faking it, drying out fresh corpses and passing them off as ancient. Even King Charles II of England drank a tincture made from human skull. It was popular enough to have a name. They called it the King's Drops. The thinking was that the life force of the dead could pass into the living. Executioners sold the blood and fat of the people they put to death. Crowds sometimes gathered at executions with cups, hoping to catch a little of it while it was still warm. The tobacco smoke enema. The tobacco smoke enema was the 18th century's idea of emergency rescue, and it worked about as well as it sounds. If someone was pulled from the River Thames looking drowned, rescuers would insert a tube and pump warm tobacco smoke into the rectum. They believed the warmth might get the person breathing again. Kits for the procedure were mounted along the riverbanks, the way you'd see a defibrillator today. It seemed to work every so often. That was probably because the shock of it startled a response out of someone who wasn't quite dead yet. Then, in 1811, a researcher showed that the nicotine was more likely to stop the heart than restart it. The phrase we still use for talking nonsense, blowing smoke, comes straight from this. Arsenic. Arsenic was sold to Victorian women as a beauty treatment. It came as little wafers they ate to make their skin pale and fashionable. And it worked, in the worst possible way. Arsenic damages the small blood vessels under the skin. That produces exactly the bloodless, delicate paleness they wanted. Meanwhile, it quietly poisons everything else. The same substance turned up in tonics for all kinds of complaints. It was even in the green wallpaper dye that slowly sickened people in their own homes. The women eating those wafers had no idea what they were doing to themselves. They were dosing themselves with one of history's favorite murder weapons. The beauty they were buying was killing them, just slowly enough to seem worth it. Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup was a hugely popular remedy for fussy, teething babies all through the 19th century. Its secret was simple. It was mostly morphine and alcohol. A dose would definitely calm a crying infant, and every so often it calmed them into a sleep they never woke up from. It took decades for anyone to say plainly what was in it. In 1911, the American Medical Association finally called it a baby killer. By then it had quieted thousands of children, some of them for good, and it was only one of many morphine syrups sold cheerfully to tired parents who trusted the bottle. Cocaine. Cocaine spent the late 1800s with a reputation as a healthy wonder drug. You could buy cocaine drops over the counter. They were advertised to parents as an instant cure for a child's toothache. Sigmund Freud was a fan. He wrote glowing papers recommending it for depression, exhaustion, and, strangely enough, as a cure for morphine addiction. He used it himself for years. The original recipe for Coca-Cola back in 1886 contained real cocaine sold as a pick-me-up for the nerves. Doctors handed it out for sadness and shyness, honestly sure they'd found a harmless little lift. That lasted right up until the addiction it caused became impossible to ignore. Freud watched a close friend fall apart on the drug he'd recommended and went quiet about it in his later years. Heroin. Heroin started out as a medicine. Bayer, the same company that makes your aspirin, put it on the market in 1898. They sold it as a cough syrup. A gentle one, they said. Safe enough for children. Doctors gave it to people with bronchitis and tuberculosis. It sat on pharmacy shelves next to the cold remedies. They named it after the German word for heroic because of how strong it made people feel. And for a while, everyone was pleased with it. Then doctors started noticing a pattern. Patients who came in for a cough were walking away with a habit far worse than the morphine addiction heroin was supposed to replace. Bayer quietly stopped making it in 1913. Strychnine. Strychnine is mostly known today as rat poison, but it was once prescribed as a stimulant and general tonic. The doses were tiny, meant to sharpen the nerves and revive a tired body. The clearest example came at the 1904 Olympic Marathon. A runner named Thomas Hicks was fading badly near the end, so his handlers kept him going with doses of strychnine mixed with brandy and raw egg. They gave it to him on purpose, mid-race, to stop his muscles from seizing up. He crossed the finish line barely conscious and close to death. They hung a gold medal around his neck, and he had to be carried off the field. Nobody thought it was cheating. At the time, it counted as good sports medicine. Malaria therapy. Malaria therapy is the one cure on this list that, as awful as it sounds, actually worked. In 1917, an Austrian psychiatrist named Julius Wagner Jauregg started deliberately infecting patients with malaria. These were people dying of late-stage syphilis, the kind that had reached the brain and meant a slow, certain death. His idea was grim but clever. The high fevers that malaria brings on were hot enough to kill the fragile syphilis bacteria. Once that was done, the malaria itself could be cleared out with quinine. It saved thousands of lives at a time when the disease was a death sentence. It won him a Nobel Prize in 1927. That's just about the only time deliberately infecting someone has been honored that way. Penicillin eventually made the whole grim trade unnecessary. Radioactive water. Radioactive water was sold in the 1920s as a health tonic. It killed one of its wealthiest customers in a genuinely horrifying way. The product was called Radithor. It was literally radium dissolved in water. It promised to cure fatigue, impotence, and aging. Real doctors backed it, assuming that if radiation could shrink tumors, more of it just meant more health. The man selling it wasn't even a real doctor. He was a Harvard dropout who put doctor in front of his name and grew rich on the fad. His best customer was an industrialist and champion golfer named Eben Byers. Byers took his doctor's advice and drank about 3 bottles a day for years. His jaw started to rot and fall apart. Holes opened in his skull. He died in 1932, with bones so radioactive he was buried in a lead-lined coffin. Researchers could still measure it decades later. The Wall Street Journal headline on his death said it best. The radium water worked fine until his jaw came off. The goat gland transplant. The goat gland transplant was the signature cure of a man named John Brinkley. His medical degree came from a diploma mill. In the 1920s, he grew rich and famous by surgically implanting slivers of goat testicle into men who wanted their virility back. It did nothing of any medical value. At least 42 of his patients died from the infections it caused. But a strong placebo effect and nonstop self-promotion kept the customers coming, at hundreds of dollars each. Brinkley made so much money that he built one of the most powerful radio stations on Earth just to advertise himself. It was so loud that people across the country could pick it up on their own radios. He came close to being elected governor of Kansas. He was finally exposed in a 1939 trial and died broke. Insulin shock therapy. Insulin shock therapy was taken seriously as psychiatric medicine from the late 1920s on. The method was brutal. Give a patient enough insulin to crash their blood sugar and drop them into a coma, sometimes for hours. The theory was that a run of these comas might somehow reset a mind caught in schizophrenia. Patients convulsed. Some were left with lasting brain damage. A number of them died. Later evidence suggested the whole thing accomplished very little. But for a couple of decades, it counted as advanced care in respectable hospitals around the world. The mathematician John Nash, whose life inspired the film A Beautiful Mind, was one of the many patients put through it. The lobotomy. The lobotomy is probably the most infamous entry on this list, and it was respectable enough to win a Nobel Prize in 1949. The operation cut the connections to the front of the brain, hoping to calm severe mental illness. Then an American doctor named Walter Freeman streamlined it into something he could do in minutes. He drove a thin steel pick through the eye socket with a few taps of a hammer. The pick was modeled on an actual ice pick from his own kitchen. Sometimes he did it without anesthesia. Sometimes he did it in front of a crowd. He traveled the country performing them by the thousands. Around 50,000 were carried out in the United States alone. Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of a future president, was given one at 23 for mood swings her family found hard to manage. She spent the rest of her life unable to speak or walk as she once had. The same doctors who had celebrated the procedure quietly dropped it. That happened once the first real psychiatric drugs arrived and showed they could calm a patient without erasing the person. So what connects all of these? Mostly desperation. The very human urge to do something rather than nothing when someone is suffering and nobody understands why. A few of them even held a grain of real truth, which is part of what made them so convincing and so dangerous. It's worth remembering the next time a miracle cure sounds a little too sure of itself. If one of these made you wince, tell me which one in the comments. And subscribe for more of the strange road medicine took to get where it is now.